Dr. Gavin. I almost wish we could have some questions, but we can do that when we have our drinks. But thank you very much. And for obvious reasons, I'm particularly inclined to ponder on the construct of agentic learning. We just prepared a proposal yesterday for a big AI research project that we were asked to participate in. And it was interesting to indeed see how many of the jobs is anticipated not to be there that are currently there. And in some ways, some of those jobs are represented in this room. And I'm just curious of how do we think around that, and how do we position ourselves. I foresee a future where we as humans are going to have a ball of a time. The computer's going to do the work and we're going to have leisure. Doesn't sound convincing. The next speaker is Towera Gondwe, our registrar, and she's going to give us her perspectives on quality assurance in higher education as she foresees it in the year 2050. Towera?
The president of the DaVinci Institute, Commissioner Edward Kiswater, Prof. Ben Anderson, our CEO, the board of directors, strategic advisory board members present, Senate members, and colleagues of DaVinci, industry partners, distinguished guests, welcome to DaVinci's academic opening for 2025. This year, the academic opening is themed, Where Do We See Education in 2050? And I was afforded the opportunity to specifically speak to the future of quality assurance in higher education by 2050. I will get to that shortly. However, it is also important to reflect on the conversations we are having now, currently, which influence the future of education. 30 years into democracy, it is expected that certain conversations would have faded or been resolved within the education sector, such as the weakened basic education system, the digital divide, which COVID-19 exposed even more than what we had imagined pre-COVID-19, the saturation of graduates being churned out of our institutions who have no work readily available for them to transition into due to the high unemployment rate. Also, we talk about the NDP and applicable SDGs. Yet, I think a lot of people question, why is there not enough action? And that's a question we ought to pose to ourselves as we have the conversation around quality in the education sector and the future thereof. I believe most of us will agree and appreciate that our history, 30 years into democracy, is indeed very young. We are not there yet, and therefore we do indeed have a pool of contributions that we ought to think around in order to change the future. I had the privilege to attend the CHE conference, which is currently ending today. And the theme was the state of quality in higher education in South Africa, 3 decades into democracy. So it ties in quite well with our theme for today. The discussions and presentations and analysis produced in beautiful ideas. And you can only imagine I sitting there and listening to all these great minds deliberate and share their philosophies around how change is not at the point where we wanted to be 30 years into democracy. And one of the presenters that I enjoyed the most was a gentleman, Associate Professor Prof. Siseko Kumalo, and he spoke about decolonization and decoloniality, right? And those discussions were very interesting because ideas were shared around how we should be decolonized by now. But then the questions that were asked were, do we understand what that means? Do we understand what that means for us? Do we understand how to incorporate that in our curricula? Do we understand how to incorporate that in our daily lives? But it was most pleasing to see that people are no longer afraid to confront such conversations. And I believe that is part of the transformation that we speak of. It was also thought-provoking from the esteemed presenters that there is a sense of fatigue around this discussion. So people are tired of hearing that it's almost a tick box exercise to discuss that we are implementing decolonization, you know? But the questions that should be indeed asked are, what do we understand by that? Does everyone who you issue a survey to understand what that is? Because apparently, a lot of people say they don't want to be involved with that, and some of them were students. So it begs the question, do we understand that yet? But let me move on. To the future of quality assurance, we of course have our immediate goals, short-term goals that we present ourselves. We met at the strategic planning session earlier this year when I joined DaVinci. And I am one of the people who were informed that sadly I might not have a job by 2050. By God's grace, if I'm alive. But you know, we had a very engaging discussion around where do we see ourselves as an institution. And I tell you today, from the CHE conference and the discussions that emerged from there, it appears indeed that we will no longer have the traditional education system that we know today and that we knew 30 years ago. It will definitely be very different. And the question that we ought to ask ourselves, if we say there will be more technological advancements, personalized and flexible learning, globalization and collaboration, sustainability, social responsibility, lifelong learning, public trust and transparency. Dr. Gavin's word, interdisciplinarity. There we go. We must then ask ourselves, are we ready for that change? Because I believe that especially when we come from a background in public institutions, we have a very rigid way of thinking. And the challenge that we have before us is to say, am I ready for change in a positive way? And that is what the future of education is. We need to no longer look, and I'm saying this as a registrar, we need to look at education in the sense that we say, I know the policy states this, is it still applicable in 2025? Do we need to have a review of some of our policies such that they apply to what we do today? And therefore, I want to challenge all of us in our quest to improve quality assurance in higher education, that by 2050, will we be ready to be dynamic, adaptable, focused on evaluating diverse learning outcomes and ensuring relevance to a rapidly changing world? Let's be deliberate rather, to be part of that transformation and to propel forward the quality drive in our delivery of education with the embracing change. And we must teach that change in our various spaces. and to not also forget quality to be at the core. And as an academic institution, the student experience is at our core. So I challenge you today, and myself, that we think around changing our mindsets first before we start thinking about issues around transformation and all the things that we have described as what our future will hold. Thank you.